Next up, Ben Frost is someone who appeared on my page several years ago and always wrote excellent comments. He was always interacting with people, and he was always everything he wrote was very, very solid and indicated a pretty deep understanding of the abolitionist position. And I had the pleasure of meeting him last October when I was in London for an event, and we really got to know each other. And not only that, but he's really good with technical stuff. He's a terrific, and he's, like everybody here, he's a friend. But he's a wonderful guy. He makes tremendous contributions to the work that we're doing. Ben Frost, there he is, Ben. He tables in, is it Manchester, right? Yeah, he tables in Manchester. Tabling, good stuff.
Hello. Hi. My advocacy tip for today is something that's quite a controversial and sort of triggering topic for a lot of people. And it's actually something that I'm going to suggest that we try and avoid in our advocacy. And that's the question of whether it's appropriate to use violent imagery when we're advocating to non-vegans, whether we should be using posters, that show cows hanging upside down with their throats slit and blood pouring out, and whether we should be holding the corpses of non-human animals, lifeless corpses, in street theatre, and all these sorts of stunts. And it's my position that's a bad idea, and I'd like to go through a couple of reasons as to why I think that is. And I think when we start thinking about these questions, it's important to remember the context in which we're addressing them. And for the last couple of hundred years now, as Gary and Anna have so eloquently developed and talked about in their work the last 30 years, we are living in a society that is dominated by animal welfarism. And it is the default position of almost every non-vegan without even realizing it. And that's the position that animals matter, sure, we shouldn't make them suffer, okay, but it's okay to kill them as long as we do it humanely. And that really has its foundations in the utilitarian thinking of the sort of the late 19th century, and that is a position that is pervasive in our society. And so when we tackle a question of something like is it wrong to use violent imagery in our advocacy, we need to bear in mind that the non-vegan population, that's where they are in their heads generally. They buy into it without even realizing it, the idea that animal use is fine so long as it's done humanely. And with that in mind, that's where a number of issues with violent imagery start occurring. Because when you put up a poster depicting some sort of violence towards an animal, or when you engage in some sort of street theatre, there is no way that a non-vegan passerby can interpret that in a way other than what they sort of already believe with their own conventional wisdom. They will look at it, and if there's no sort of follow-up, which there generally isn't, they will interpret it as perpetuating the idea that, yes, this is horrific, what is being done to these animals, this is absolutely abhorrent, and it shouldn't be done, and we should avoid causing all that sort of horrible, nasty pain, but it's okay because I eat cage-free eggs, or it's okay because I'm eating crate-free pork. When we present these images, we are not fulfilling, we are not doing right, essentially, by the non-human animals that we wish to do right by, in the sense that we are not attacking is the wrong word, but we are not addressing the fundamental core beliefs of the non-vegans that we're engaging, because we are not asking them to challenge their own perception of animals as things to use as resources. We are not challenging the notion that use is the actual problem, not treatment. In a strange way, in relying on violent imagery, we are using the welfarist conventional wisdom, and we are perpetuating it. In my view, that's the main problem with using violent imagery, in that it creates this perpetuation of something that we need to try and get away from, and it doesn't attack the fundamental core beliefs of the non-vegans that we are trying to educate. Building on that point, I would say that it is crucially important that we advocate with clarity and with consistency. And something like violent imagery, it remains horrifically open to interpretation. What one person sees, another person will see differently. What one person thinks upon seeing such an image will think and see something else. As I said, you'll get people that, on the off chance they might think, oh damn, I'm using animals, maybe that's a bad thing. But then on the other hand, another person will walk past and think, yeah, that's bad, but I'm doing my best. I'm a reducitarian. I'm a flexitarian. It propagates this sense that people can sort of create more excuses for themselves because they don't have to address it, because they don't feel like they have to. So yeah, as an annex to that, another point that I'd like to make, and which, I realize is controversial for a lot of people, but I also find that using imagery in this way is actually quite disrespectful to the non-human victim that is involved in the image, in the sense that, we would never, in a human context, go out on the street and hold, the lifeless remains of a human being as some sort of promotional stunt. That wouldn't even occur to us as something that was rational or moral to do. Yet when it comes to animals, we are, some people are more than happy to go out and, take bodies from slaughterhouses and continue perpetuating the idea that animals are objects for us to use in some way, because essentially that's what it's still doing. You're using them as some form of tool, and I find that to be disrespectful to the victims of that exploitation, and I think we need to be mindful of that. And again, as Gary talks about in his work, we need to apply the principle of equal consideration in all of our sort of conflicts with animals. And to me, in doing these sorts of stunts, we are not applying the principle of equal consideration, because we are using animals in a way that we would not use human remains. We would treat the human remains with respect. So that's sort of, I appreciate that a lot of people might not agree with that. But really, the fundamental thing is that when we use violent imagery, we are perpetuating the idea that treatment is the issue and not use. And that, in my view, is the wrong thing to do. We should be embracing the abolitionist approach. We should be focusing on the idea that treating animals as property is a violation of their fundamental right as sentient beings not to be used as resources. And when Gary mentioned that I do tabling efforts, that is an incredibly effective approach, and Christian has touched on it as well, and that's the idea of what Gary and Anna refer to as the humane treatment principle, and that's the sort of the idea that everyone agrees that it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering and death on animals. And my point with that is that you don't even need to use any sort of stunt or graphic imagery to get people thinking about animal use. And when you use that argument, when you're tabling, when you're doing your activism, and someone comes up to you, as soon as you use that argument, people are switched on immediately, because they think, damn, yeah, I agree with that. I think it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering and death. And then it's just a case of pointing out that if you agree that unnecessary suffering and death is wrong, the rational extension of that is veganism, because if you are not vegan, you are inflicting that exact same unnecessary suffering and death that you claim to reject. And once people see that, I've tabled a number of times, and not one person that I've come across has ever said that they disagree with that idea. Everyone agrees with it. Because as much as the welfarist position that is entrenched within society is incredibly problematic in that it focuses on treatment and it doesn't think that animal use is wrong, everyone still agrees that animals have moral value. And we need to use that And that argument is an incredible way of tapping into that moral concern and using it to direct them to the abolitionist approach and the first principle, which is what I always directly link to, which is that we cannot justify using sentient beings as resources, as our property, and talking about why that is. And I would hope and I would suggest that every one of us would educate ourselves and read Professor Francione and Alan Charlton's books and get out there and do their own abolitionist tabling work or whatever else it is that you feel comfortable to do. Thank you very much.
You know, also, I agree with him. You should read all my books. But also on the website, abolitionistapproach.com, like there are hundreds of essays that you could like read. Not now, don't read them now. But you know, you can read. You can covering lots and lots of topics, including things like using graphic imagery and welfare versus rights and the property status of animals and stuff. So you know, there's tons of stuff out there that we're providing, you know, for free that you can get access to immediately.